Welcome to this debate summary of Jubilee Surrounded featuring Allie Beth Stuckey facing 20 liberal Christians. In this video, we break down the most intense and thought-provoking moments from the discussion into 10 clear takeaways. From the clash over biblical authority to heated arguments on marriage, abortion, empathy, and modern faith, this summary captures how deeply divided Christianity has become today. Stay till the end to see how both sides challenge each other's beliefs on truth, love, and what it really means to follow Christ. Takeaway 1. The debate shows a deep divide within Christianity. The discussion between Allie Beth Stuckey and the 20 liberal Christians shows how sharply divided modern Christianity has become over issues like marriage, sexuality, abortion, and empathy. Both sides believe they are following the Bible, yet they interpret it in completely different ways. Allie defends traditional biblical teachings, such as marriage being between a man and a woman, while many of the liberal Christians argue that Scripture must be understood in its cultural and historical context. This clash shows how one group treats the Bible as an unchanging moral standard, while the other sees it as a living document that must adapt to changing times. The tension throughout the debate reveals how Christians today often share the same faith, but live in completely different worlds. For example, when a liberal participant mentioned that David had many wives, Allie replied that the Bible describes that, but never approves of it, showing how both read the same verses, but arrive at opposite moral conclusions. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 2. Allie Beth Stuckey argues that marriage has a divine meaning. Allie explains that marriage is not just a social contract, but a sacred reflection of Christ's relationship with the church. She says that according to Genesis, God created man and woman to represent an eternal reality, with Christ as the groom and the church as the bride. This forms the basis of her view that same-sex marriage cannot reflect that divine truth. She quotes Ephesians 5, where marriage is described as a mirror of Christ and his church, and insists that this spiritual symbolism cannot exist between two men or two women. The liberal Christians challenge this by saying, the Bible includes examples of polygamy and complex family structures, but Allie argues that these are examples of human failure, not divine approval. For example, when Gilbert, one of the liberal Christians, said he could find a monogamous same-sex partner who honors love as described in 1 Corinthians 13, Allie replied that love must still align with God's design, and no verse in the Bible supports same-sex marriage. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 3. Liberal Christians question traditional views of Scripture. Several of the liberal participants, including Paul and Danny, question Allie's literal interpretation of the Bible. They argue that many biblical stories, like Genesis, should be read as symbolic rather than literal history. Danny mentions that his Jewish friends who are familiar with Hebrew Scripture do not read Genesis as a scientific or historical account, but as an archetypal story about relationships and cooperation. They see the creation story not as a rule book about gender or marriage, but as a metaphor for human connection. This shows how liberal theology tends to focus more on the spiritual message than the strict wording of the text. Allie, however, says that Jesus himself took Genesis literally when he referred to Adam and Eve while teaching about marriage and divorce, and therefore Christians should do the same. The back and forth highlights the larger question of whether the Bible should be treated as a moral law for all time or as a collection of stories meant to guide people according to the spirit of the message. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 4. The abortion debate reveals moral and emotional conflict. When the discussion turns to abortion, Allie calls it the intentional killing of a human being in the womb and describes it as a grave moral evil. The liberal Christians argue that abortion is healthcare and that women should have the right to choose. One participant named Steve says that most abortions happen before the fetus can feel pain, but Allie responds that killing is still wrong whether or not the victim feels it. She compares it to saying that it is acceptable to kill a person under anesthesia simply because they cannot feel pain. Another guest, Katrina, brings up a strange Old Testament passage from Numbers 5 that seems to describe a ritual causing miscarriage. She argues this could show a biblical tolerance for abortion, but Allie insists the passage is misunderstood and that it actually protects women from jealous husbands. For example, Allie says, "Thou shalt not murder" is an absolute, showing her belief that abortion, no matter the context, violates God's commandment. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 5, the liberal side connects faith with compassion and choice. Many of the liberal Christians, such as Angie, argue that laws based on Christian beliefs should not be forced on non-Christians. Angie says that while she personally would not choose abortion, she believes others should have the right to decide based on their own circumstances. She reminds Allie that even in the Bible, there are cases where innocent life is lost due to complex moral situations, like when David's child dies as a consequence of his sin. This side sees Christianity as a faith that should emphasize understanding, forgiveness, and personal responsibility rather than strict moral control. For example, Angie says she was raised in a conservative home, but learned that compassion for others sometimes means letting them make their own choices, even if we disagree with those choices. We're halfway through the video. Thanks for sticking with us. If you're enjoying it, hit the thumbs up and share it in your WhatsApp groups. If you'd like to support us, please tap the thanks button below. It helps us keep making great content. Drop a comment and don't forget to hit subscribe for more. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 6. The discussion on empathy exposes different moral priorities. Allie's third claim, that empathy can be toxic and lead to sin, becomes one of the most heated topics. She explains that empathy can cause people to affirm behaviors that the Bible calls sinful because they feel sorry for others. She gives the example of affirming someone's transgender identity out of compassion, but says that doing so supports a lie rather than truth. Several participants disagree, saying that empathy is what connects people and allows love to grow. One of them, Paul, argues that Jesus showed empathy when he bent down to meet the woman caught in adultery and told the crowd that whoever was without sin should cast the first stone. Allie answers that Jesus forgave her, but also told her to go and sin no more, which she believes shows that love must be rooted in truth, not in emotional sympathy alone. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 7. Progressive Christians emphasize Jesus' compassion over rules. Many of the liberal guests repeat that Jesus' main message was love, not strict obedience to religious rules. They argue that Jesus reached out to the poor, the sick, and the outcasts, which means modern Christians should do the same, even if that means accepting people whose lives do not fit traditional moral expectations. For instance, one liberal pastor named Danny says his church is growing with queer members who display the fruits of the Spirit, such as kindness, patience, and self-control. He asks Allie how people who live sinful lives can still show such Christ-like qualities. Allie replies that common grace allows anyone, even non-believers, to display good traits, but that does not make every lifestyle holy. The exchange captures a key difference in modern Christianity, where one group believes holiness comes from obedience to God's commands, and the other believes it comes from love and inclusion. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 8. The debate exposes how Christianity faces modern moral issues. Throughout the conversation, both sides use the Bible to address modern topics like gender identity, same-sex relationships, abortion, and social justice. The challenge is that the Bible was written in a completely different time and culture. The liberal participants believe that modern science and social understanding should inform how Christians apply Scripture today. Allie, however, argues that moral truth does not change with time or culture. For example, she says that science actually supports biblical design because every human is born with half of a reproductive system meant to unite with the opposite sex. This exchange shows that the real struggle is not only about interpreting the Bible, but also about how to balance ancient faith with modern knowledge. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 9. Emotional and social tension keeps the debate engaging. Even though the show is based on heavy theological subjects, the human side of the conversation keeps it emotionally intense and captivating. The format of one conservative against 20 liberals makes each interaction charged with tension and curiosity. Viewers can see how calm reasoning sometimes clashes with frustration, and how personal stories influence beliefs more than abstract theology. There are moments when Allie is praised for her composure, and others where the crowd seems frustrated by her firm answers. This emotional back and forth makes the discussion feel real and relatable, rather than purely academic. For example, when one participant thanks her for staying calm under pressure, it shows that even people who disagree with her respect her courage to face 20 opponents at once. Now let's move to the last takeaway. Takeaway 10. The debate ends by confronting the idea of progress and harm. In the closing section, Gilbert claims that the church's condemnation of same-sex relationships has caused deep suffering among gay people. This moves the debate from theology to human pain. Allie listens but maintains that telling people the truth, even when it hurts, is still an act of love. The liberal Christians argue that such truth can drive people away from faith and even from life itself, while Allie says that affirming sin only leads to more suffering in the long run. This final exchange summarizes the entire discussion. One side believes compassion must guide morality, and the other believes morality must guide compassion. For example, when Gilbert says that church rejection has caused unnecessary suffering, Allie responds that the real harm comes from sin itself, not from those who call it out. This leaves viewers with a challenging question about what it truly means to love others in a world where truth and empathy often pull in opposite directions. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support this channel, hit the thanks button below. It really helps us keep going. If you enjoyed this summary, please leave a like and share it in your WhatsApp groups. To join discussion about this video, drop a comment below. And for more videos like this, hit the subscribe button below.